Okay. Good morning, everybody. All right, happy Friday, everybody. It's the last day of the week. Are we all in a good mood this morning? Was anyone here yesterday? Did you see Steve Wozniak on stage? It was a good show, wasn't it? Had a really good time with him. I think it was probably one of the best sessions we've had at the CeBIT Global Conference. It's an incredibly good day. This is the final day of the week. We're going to try to keep that energy and momentum up today. We've got a good program of speakers and topics for you, and we're going to end the day with a big name and a big idea, the idea of putting the world of encyclopedias on the internet. The founder of Wikipedia is going to be here today, and we're going to talk with him about keeping the internet open, how reliable Wikipedia really is, and I might even get him to talk to me a little bit about why he loves Bitcoin all of a sudden. We also want to extend a welcome to our live stream viewers who are watching us from around the world. We're glad to have you guys with us on this last day. And a reminder, you can send questions in to me if you want me to ask our speakers something. Use hashtag CGC14, or you can send them to me at Brent Goff TV on Twitter. All right, we're going to start today with mobile cloud services and a man who is a welcome and a familiar face here at the CeBIT Global Conferences. Please help me welcome the head of mobile at Dropbox, Mr. Lars Fjeldsoe-Nielsen. Have fun.
Thanks, Brent. So who in this room would have figured out and thought 10 years ago that you'd be here at CeBIT today? You know, life is full of surprises. And me, for one, I did not expect to be here the day after the great Wozniak was here. Something's clearly wrong with the world. But we've also, the last 10 years, gone through this tectonic shift of mobile just taking over the world. Sort of like this, the industry has gone from land grab mode to now it's a retention mode, and it's in loyalty mode. So it's holding on to your customers because saturation has happened in the market. And a lot of changes have happened. And Charles Darwin, he said, it's the species that best adapt to change that are the most likely of surviving. But guess what? Surviving is not enough anymore. It's about winning. It's a completely different environment today. And now, at the end of this talk, I'll give my prediction for what I think it takes to win today in this environment that we're in. So, in 2013, it was the first time that we passed 1 billion smartphones being shipped in a year. That's a massive number. In fact, it's 3 times as many units as PCs selling during that same period. Nobody could have predicted that. Just a few years ago, nobody could even have predicted that. And in 2011, it was half as many units. So we've doubled in a very short period of time. So let's imagine what's going to happen next. And nobody wants to be like the dodo, end up like the dodo. You know, it's a bird without wings. I mean, that's pathetic, right? I mean, we're in this to make a difference, to make a dent in the universe. And I suppose like a modern day version of the dodo is the Flappy Bird. And I always test this with people because it gives away the age of the audience. So thanks for doing that. So what is a smartphone? You know, what does the bill of material look like of a smartphone? I'm going to ask you all, take out your phones, please. Doesn't happen often. Take out your phones, everybody. And then look at the person next to you. Look at what phone they've got. You know, check out their gear. And the reality is, all phones look alike now. And if you look at how handset manufacturers, how they promote and the selling points for the handsets, they all look alike. They talk about the screen, they talk about the size, talk about the the memory on the handset, talk about the processor, talk about the camera, and the battery. And my question is, has the phone really reached the shape of a raindrop now? The equivalent. It's sort of like this perfect shape created by nature for its purpose. And has the phone, in the way that we use it today, we'll talk about that later, has that really reached sort of the optimum beautiful shape? And I think Wozniak yesterday mentioned also that, look, Apple just did such an amazing job when they launched the iPhone back in 2007, that the iterations since then have only been incremental. It hasn't been like these big, really changing moves. I think the Note 3 from Samsung, that's probably an example of a phone that changed the way it looked a little bit, and probably as a result also the way people use the phone. So if we look at how do people pick their phones today, how do all of us, when we walk into a store, how do we pick a phone? And if we look at how Apple looks at that question, they say there are 3 steps to it. First, you pick the color. And really this makes me think of, Henry Ford, who said you can pick any color you want as long as it's black. It's the same stage we're at today in the mobile industry. And the second point is you pick the memory on the handset. So users today are ingrained and educated in a way that they think, when I pick a phone, I pick the color first, then I pick the size of the memory on the handset. And I tell you what, this actually makes my blood boil. Because this is like we're thinking like Neanderthals still. And we haven't moved forward while all these services are available today. And I'll talk about this a little bit in a moment. And the third point is the carrier, of course. And the carrier is, this has just become almost the same that everybody offers. So if we look at the storage that we use on the handsets, this is a screenshot of my usage. And a couple of things stood out to me. First of all, the majority of my storage, and my guess is the same applies to you, is from photos and videos. Because we just take a lot of photos now. It's almost as if the photos have become this live stream of stuff that we do, compared to, before a decade ago, where it was you would take a photo and be very thoughtful about it, and you would have it printed out a week later and put it in an album and spend this time curating it, right? It's no longer the case. So every photo now, it's almost like the value has diminished for all these photos. And yet, I hold 20 gigabytes of photos. My conclusion from that is it's also dependent on how many kids you have. I have 3 kids. That's probably why so many photos. But my point about space before was, why is it that users, and we all go in and buy handsets and pay $100 for each category extra? So from 16 to 32, from 32 to 64, we pay $100 extra. That's a lot of money. Just for some dumb memory on the handset. When there are all these services available today that are online, and really you cannot tell the difference whether your photo is on the phone or whether it's online, because you're connected the whole time. And yes, there probably has to be an element of some of the content that you have on your phone being cached in sort of like smart memory, because sometimes you're flying and so on. But that can all be solved. But I feel this is a big, big gap that's going on right now between what's reality out there and what users and people are still being offered in the shops. Let's look at how we all spend our time on the handsets. And, no surprise, a lot of messaging, a lot of voice, as one would expect. That's what the device was really meant for in the beginning. But the big thing that's changed now is, of course, that people spend more time in aggregate doing everything else than voice and messaging. And in fact, some research that came out just recently showed that the US, for the first time, came with and generated more data revenues than voice revenues at around $90 billion in 2013. And they're not the first country where this happens, or where this happened. In Japan, for example, and 5 other countries, this has happened before. So this means we're all spending more time on data as opposed to voice. And that means that's a challenge to the industry, because mobile operators are used to voice and messaging and generate all the revenues from that. You know, when I started here, this was actually my first trade show ever in my career. That was a CeBIT, and it was miserable. It was absolutely miserable weather, but it was sort of like this big eye-opener of what was going on. And back then, this is 12, 13 years ago. Back then, it was about 20% of revenues came from data. And data was messaging at the time. So it means 80% of all operator revenues were from voice. And now that's, of course, all changed. And the operators, they had these cash cows with voice and messaging that are suddenly taken over by sort of the new generation. And WhatsApp is a good example of that. You know, bought for $19 billion by Facebook. I think it was brilliant. I mean, Facebook, they own messaging now. WhatsApp, they have 1 million new users signing up every day. It's like in 5 days, that's a Denmark every 5 days. If you can't tell from my accent, I'm half Danish. And then the price tag, you can discuss that. Okay, $19 billion, that's a lot of money. I mean, that is a lot of money. But think about it. Last year alone, WhatsApp, they evaporated over $33 billion in revenues from the mobile industry. And guess what? They have 500 million users today, and they will be at 1 billion users not before long. So $19 billion suddenly seems like a small price tag to own messaging, global messaging. If you think about the slide just before, that was by Mary Meeker at Kleiner Perkins. And if messaging is like the #1 thing that people they do, $19 billion is peanuts. So how does Facebook think about it? And they're thinking about it like as a suite of apps. It's not a very big suite. There are just a few apps in there, but they all matter. And Facebook, they're thinking about it like they just want to own messaging. So they have the Facebook, the sort of standard app that they, of course, they keep developing. They have Paper that they just released recently. This is more of an experiment to sort of see the flow. And then they have Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp. And in February, so Distagram just came out with a study, and they showed in February, if you had an iPhone, the top 3 free apps on the iPhone were from Facebook. So they own messaging. I mean, it's amazing. So much upside for that company. How does Apple think about it? In the same way. They have this suite of apps. They've built their own apps, as opposed to Facebook that have been acquiring companies like Instagram as well. Instagram now seems like peanuts for $1 billion, right? It's amazing how quickly things change. And Apple, they have this own suite of apps, but they've built their own apps. And we know iTunes, of course. They have, their iMessage that they started with that. But the reality is, all these apps are really well integrated. So if you use one app, it fits very well into the next app. And what you can do, so if you take a photo, it's sort of the flow of sharing that photo is very logical. It's not noisy. It's beautifully integrated into the hardware as well. But the apps alone, the standalone experiences are actually not as good as what you find in the market. I think iMessenger is an example. iMessenger only works for other iPhones. So it means if you have a Samsung handset, and Samsung is selling twice as many phones as Apple is every quarter, so there's a very high likelihood you have a Samsung handset. My wife uses a Samsung handset. Then I can't use my iMessenger with her. It comes across as a text message. And it's not like an interactive experience, just like WhatsApp is, for example. iTunes, the same thing. How many in here have spent money on iTunes? Just raise your hands. As expected, most of us have. And my experience with iTunes, and I sort of ask you to try the same thing, is once I had spent too much money on music, like for paying for every single song, spent time and invested time, just like curating my photos, I curated my music. And I made these playlists. And the moment that I found out that I could take these playlists and drag them into Spotify, and Spotify just automatically suddenly have the same playlist, I was sold. I was never going back to iTunes again. So this is another example of the standalone experience. There's better alternatives out in the market. And finally, Google. So if you buy an Android handset today, 19 of the apps on that handset are from Google. And Google have been doing the same as Apple. So they've been building their own apps. They've been acquiring some as well, but generally building their own apps. There are 19 of them. I mean, that's a lot. And the reality is that you can't hit it best with all of these apps, right? You can't, because it's an open market. The market is freely developing the best experiences. And then people are upvoting what they think are the best experiences. So for one company to do everything themselves is very hard. But Google have just nailed it with shipping all the handsets today on Android. And what do all these three companies have in common? Facebook, Apple, and Google? Well, they're in this retention mode. They're trying to make their experiences sticky and people to buy more handsets and use more of their services. Because the reality is, the handsets alone, that's not a business. You need the service layer on top of that. That's a big lesson that only handset manufacturers have come to learn now. And think about the PC industry, my point before. 3 times as many smartphones sold as PCs. PCs are going down. Smartphones are still exploding in the volumes. And one lesson that we've all learned from has been the carrier's churn rate. This is the biggest challenge that the carriers have today, are these massive churn rates. I'm showing a couple of numbers up on the slide deck. And let me explain how we derive these numbers. So Dropbox has 200 million users globally. And we said, let's take a snapshot of users a year ago and see what networks they're on, what operators, what carriers are they using. And then let's look at those same users today, what operators they're using now. And that way we derive the churn. And we saw, for example, that Orange had 47% churn. That means of all the users that were on Orange a year ago, 47% of them have gone to other operators. I mean, and imagine how much money they're spending. And this applies to all. Even the lowest churn rate at 18% is still very high. That means 1/5, every 5th user that costs a lot to get on board is no longer with you a year ago. I'm sure those marketing budgets could be spent better. And running the same numbers for Germany, you know, we run from 16% with Deutsche Telekom, with T-Mobile, to 42% with E+. And by the way, WhatsApp in Barcelona, they said that they were going to move into voice now as well, and MVNO with E+. So guess what that's going to do for the industry? And how's Samsung doing? So they are adapting to change by partnering up with key players. They started with Android, and that was a risky bet for them to do, because suddenly they're dependent on Android and what they do and the 19 apps that the Android team produced. Samsung have to take them, and Samsung at the same time want to put their own apps out there, right? Their own services. Otherwise, they're too dependent on Google. But they've created a symbiotic relationship. Samsung shipping a lot of handsets, making Android extremely successful, and the Android team is taking care of the services for Samsung. But then they also partnered up with with the carriers, with the mobile operators. And the brilliant thing that Samsung did was to say, let's just focus on one brand, the Galaxy brand. This was what Apple did as well. Apple did, it's the iPhone, it's one brand. So when you walk into a store, you know exactly what you want. You want the iPhone. And Samsung have done the same thing. So you walk into a store and you're going to ask for the Galaxy brand. And you're not confused by a lot of different weird names and so on. And then, of course, one thing that I've spent a lot of time on is working with Samsung and making the partnership with them. And our team, we have an amazing team. We've all been working on this day and night. And what Samsung said was they addressed this sort of dilemma that the industry is in now, where handsets are selling with these gigabyte of memory, 16, 32, 64, et cetera. And Samsung took the first step towards saying, hey, what if we can sort of combine the memory that's on the hardware with memory that's online? So this is what we did, and we offered users 50 gigabyte for 2 years for free. It was a bundle. So it means Samsung, they gave Dropbox distribution, so Dropbox could grow more and be built into the different experiences on the Samsung handset. Dropbox took this risk of saying, hey, people today get 2 gigabyte for free, but we'll give you 50 gigabyte for 2 years. It could have cannibalized our entire user base. So it was a bold bet, but it worked out. And Samsung, they're benefiting from extra sales because 18% of people who bought the handset and knew about the partnership, they said they bought it because of the partnership. Because they're getting something of value, something that they would normally pay for, they're getting that included in purchasing this handset. And Dropbox, of course, we've benefited from distribution and marketing, and the operators, they have a great story because they're rolling out LTE, 4G networks, and they're saying it's all about data, it's all about content, and Dropbox is sort of a layer in between that can facilitate that. So what are the lessons from this? And what have others done in the same sort of big bet category? Well, look at T-Mobile. This was in the US, and they said you get free data roaming if you get a T-Mobile SIM card. And that means for anybody coming from the US with a T-Mobile SIM, coming to Europe, they don't have to pay for data roaming. I mean, that is a bold bet. My assumption is that they've made billions of dollars in revenues from data, and suddenly they're giving that open to the users to choose and not pay roaming charges anymore. I mean, we all know the feeling of traveling and we don't know what's our bill gonna be like. We have no idea of finding out. That's for voice as well, but they did it for data, which is the future for them. So they made a big bet with the future. And then we did the same churn rate study with T-Mobile. And we said, okay, so they launched this in October last year. What's the impact been of this? And T-Mobile have not spoken about this, so I'm actually not sure if they're going to be happy or not about me sharing this. But we did the same thing, and we said, well, people on Dropbox, before T-Mobile, they launched this big bet. What was the churn rate then? And it was over 40%. And afterwards now, it's about 20%, 22%. So they've halved their churn rate in a few months. I mean, that is bold. So somebody at T-Mobile must have been thinking, what's our big bet? I'll share now what my big bet has been in my life. I've never told anybody this before. Only my wife knows about this. And 6 years ago, we moved to the US, me, my wife, and my kid, Emily. I had one kid at the time. And we said, you know what, this is our big bet. We're gonna pack up our bags, and we're gonna move over and try something new. So I spent 5 years, and this is sort of this secret I've never shared with anybody, 5 years writing a book. It's 1,000 pages, it's 3 binds, and it's about an application. It's a visa application, not an app like on the App Store. And why did I write this book? Well, I wanted my kids to one day see how they got to where they are, how they got their education, and not take everything for granted. There's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to give them this amazing life they have today. And the other thing was for us to learn from this experience. sort of going through this hell of taking a bet that you somewhat know is going to work out or not. In fact, the first day that we arrived in the US, the company that came over, they blew up. I wasn't going to go back. I was going to stay there. I packed up my bags. I cried goodbye to my family, to my friends, everything. I wasn't going to go back. And then the US government makes me apply for an O1 visa. The title of the visa is, it's an alien of extraterrestrial abilities. It's like Lars from Mars situation going on. But my big point with this book was that there were a lot of lessons to make from it. And that brings me to another book that I wrote. You can't buy it. There's something very personal to me, but I think there's some lessons. And I'd like to share those. This was written under very different circumstances. So imagine, it's a beautiful Sunday morning in California. I don't live very far from Wozniak. I do have internet connection though. And I get a phone call. And it's the UK Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And they tell me that my sister-in-law, Katie, has just died. I'm the first one to know in the family. I have to call her parents. And I walked outside of the house when I heard this, because I didn't want my family to see the reaction. I go back in, I have to tell my wife that her little sister has just died. My wife was 9 months pregnant. And we were scheduled to go to hospital the next day to give birth. And little Caspar was born a few days later. And here you see him with his sisters. And the place where I found energy, where I found purpose, where I found escapism, was writing the book, Beyond the App Stores. Give purpose to the stuff I was doing. I mean, why are we all here in this room today and people online? What are we doing? What's the purpose with what we're doing? We can't afford to waste time. We're here for a meaning, right? We're here for a reason. And I found this purpose in building partnerships. It's like happens to be the trade that I understand. And that's working right now. It's changing fast. And writing down all my thoughts and all the lessons that I made, especially with the last years with Dropbox and the Samsung partnership, where things are just moving so fast and the industry is just exploding, just gave me a lot of energy, and I felt I wanted to tell the world about it. So what I'm about to do now, I'm going to ask you for help, because I'm not going to be very popular with the most powerful men and women in the industry. But I think it's going to move the industry forward. And I think we can do it here together. Imagine 2015, you walk into an operator store anywhere in the world, and you know how I showed the Kleiner Perkins slide before with all the things we do in the phones, so voice, messaging, games, music, memory, etc. Imagine you can just walk in and you buy a bundle with the services in each of those categories that people are paying for today. And it's just part of a bundle. You don't pay for those services. They're part of a bundle that you buy from the operator, a data bundle. That means unlimited data access to WhatsApp, so you don't pay when you go abroad for data access. Skype, it's amazing. It's the only real voice alternative out there today. Imagine you get 100 euros worth of phone calls there as part of this bundle. Spotify music, gaming, unlimited access to gaming. from the big brands. LinkedIn, social media is big. LinkedIn is the only paying service on the social media side, and it's an incredible service. And then content, access to Dropbox. The Dropbox Pro account that we've almost tested with Samsung. So this works. It's not something that you can go and do today, but we could. Like us in this room, we could actually make this happen. I was talking about purpose before. We can make this happen. So what we need to do is, when we leave this room, is like go and tell the world about it. Tell your friends about it, tell your families about it, tell everybody about it. Imagine this scenario. And with that, I'll buy beer for everybody in the room here when we make this happen. And tweet about it, tweet Uber Bundle. Prost, and thank you very much.
That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Really good. We've got some time for Q&A. Let's talk a little bit about this notion of memory. Why is there a difference between handset memory and services like Dropbox?
So I think it comes down to it's almost like the two parallel industries going on. And you have the hardware, sort of the legacy industry they're being reinvented. And it's very sort of based on the bill of material. And this is how you build up the phone, and you have the chips, and you buy this from the suppliers, etc. And this notion of services is completely new. It's only Apple who sort of started with that, and everybody is now aspiring to move into that as well. And Samsung is starting to do some good moves there. And then you have like the other sort of end, where you have services like Dropbox, and there are a lot of players out there. And that kind of industry is trying to understand the hardware. So there's a discrepancy between understanding. It's almost like a cultural difference that has to be.
Yeah, because when you look at all of those companies that you had up there, I mean, those are very different cultures. Why do you think that all of these companies are going to work together?
I think it's going to be hard. That's the reality. I mean, I think it comes down to the CEOs, and I think that's the challenge that we have to set out there. Is the CEOs should get together and talk about this. Everybody would benefit from that. The user would benefit from it because they get a bundle. This is like you go on a holiday and you have the hotel and you have the flight and you have the meals. Everything is included already, and you know what you're paying.
But yeah, so I was going to ask you, why would the users buy this bundle?
Yeah, because I think they would get amazing value for money. So it means the user would get amazing value for money. Instead of having to buy from each individual service, they could buy this bundle.
Yeah.
The service providers, yes, they take a risk by sort of offering this service included in a bundle, but they will get growth and distribution from that. This is what we've seen from Dropbox. I mean, these are facts. And the handset manufacturers and the carriers, they get more sales. Excuse me, the carriers, they get data bundles, and the handset manufacturers, they sell more handsets.
Okay.
And provide more distribution in return.
Okay.
So everybody wins from it, but it's an uncomfortable move to make. It's like an illogical move to make almost.
Speaking of winning, yesterday we gave away an Apple II computer with Steve Wozniak. Did you see that?
Yes, I did.
Okay,
Yeah.
Good. So I think you saw us do that and you thought, oh, I should get in on that. So Niels has a giveaway for, well, I guess for everybody in the audience today, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, tell us about it.
Well, thought about stepping it up a little bit and sort of not just talk, but action. So we have 50 gigabytes for everybody in the room here. So just come up and pick it up, and we will be handing that out.
Good. Do you want them maybe to meet you over there? Do they get the
Yes, I think we have some people helping out here with it.
Okay,
Yeah.
very
Perfect.
good.
Thank you.
Okay, you guys have that. Okay. Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, Brett.
Good to see you.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye now.
Thank you.